I do not go to church rummage sales anymore. That sounds like a fake little rule somebody says for dramatic effect, like they are trying to make ordinary life sound haunted. But I mean it literally. If somebody at work says their aunt's parish is doing one of those basement sales with old Pyrex and Christmas villages and boxes of paperback romances for 50 cents, I find a reason to leave the room. If I walk past a fellowship hall and catch that smell of burnt coffee, wet cardboard, old perfume, and dusty fabric softener, I don't just feel nostalgic. My stomach turns hard and fast. My hands get cold. Once, 3 summers ago, I almost dropped a rack of clean mugs at the diner because a women's Bible study group came in wearing the same powdery rose perfume my friend Kendra started smelling after the board said a dead woman's name. I was 24 when it happened, working the overnight desk at a roadside motel outside Dayton and taking 2 online paralegal classes I kept telling everybody were temporary until I could afford to go back full time. Temporary turned into 2 years because life has a way of taking one solid plan and turning it into 3 smaller, uglier plans you have to pretend you chose. I lived in a 2nd-floor apartment over a laundromat with my friend Kendra. The building was one of those brick rectangles from the 70s with bad insulation, bad windows, and a stairwell that always smelled faintly like bleach and fryer grease because the sandwich shop next door vented straight into the alley. Our kitchen floor sloped enough that if you set a marble down near the sink it would roll toward the refrigerator. Kendra had been my friend since sophomore year of high school, back when she had a pink streak in her hair, and got suspended for calling a geometry teacher a fascist. By 24, she had toned down exactly none of the important parts of herself. She worked the front desk at a lash studio, did side jobs tinting brows out of our living room, and had the kind of face that made strangers tell her their secrets at checkout counters. She was adopted as an infant and had a complicated relationship with that fact, in the way a lot of people do when they've spent their whole life hearing 2 opposite scripts at once. Script 1 was that she was chosen and loved and saved. Script 2 was that she should never sound too curious about where she came from, because that would hurt the people who raised her. So she handled it by joking first. If somebody asked whether she ever wanted to meet her biological family, she'd say something like, maybe, but only if they're rich and naturally thin. The thing that pushed it from joke territory into something raw was medical paperwork. She had fainted twice that spring, once at work after standing up too fast from the rolling stool, and once in the parking lot outside the laundromat when she bent down to grab a dryer sheet and just folded at the waist like somebody had clipped her strings. The urgent care doctor wanted family history. Heart problems, seizures, diabetes, clotting disorders, anything. Kendra had almost nothing. Her adoptive mom Sharon had a thin packet from the agency with ages, hair colour, and one line that said maternal grandmother alive, no listed conditions at time of placement. Kendra came home from Sharon's house angry enough to slam our cabinet doors, not crying. Kendra almost never cried in front of people. Angry. I remember the exact stupid detail from that night because memory keeps junk when it can't hold the big thing all at once. She had brought home a bag of frozen mango from the discount grocer and ripped it open with so much force the seam split sideways and chunks rolled under the stove. She stood there barefoot in the kitchen swearing while I got on my knees with a wooden spoon to fish them out. She said Sharon kept doing that careful mum voice like every answer had to be bubble wrapped. She said all she asked was whether the agency had ever mentioned epilepsy or heart issues, and Sharon reacted like she had demanded the names of everybody in a sealed grave. Maybe she was scared, I said. Kendra snorted. Everybody's always scared when it's me asking a question. The rummage sale happened that same week because my Aunt Denise volunteered with a parish out in Beaver Creek and needed help hauling folding tables back upstairs after the sale ended. She paid in baked ziti and first pick of whatever the old ladies hadn't claimed for themselves. So I drove out there after my motel shift with coffee breath and a headache and helped stack card tables while Denise argued with another woman about whether 3 chipped dessert plates counted as a set. Kendra came because she wanted out of the apartment and because there was a rumour the church ladies got good costume jewellery from estate clean-outs. Most of what was left by then was exactly what you'd expect. VHS aerobics tapes, candle holders shaped like grapes, a bread machine with no paddle, 6 copies of The Bridges of Madison County, a weird amount of rooster decor. Kendra found a black beaded cardigan she said made her look like a widow with resources. I found 2 unopened boxes of legal pads and a lamp with a crooked shade. The board was in a milk crate under a pile of board games with missing pieces. It was a folding travel Ouija board. Not wood, not antique, not cinematic. Cheap pressboard coated in glossy plastic, letters printed in faded gold, stars in the corners, and a clear plastic planchette with a little oval window that made it look more like a toy magnifier than something spiritual. Somebody had taped the side seam at some point with yellowing office tape. It smelled like old attic dust and strawberry gum. Kendra held it up and waggled it at me. "Family history," she said. I told her to stop. She bought it for $2 anyway. If this had been a story where every warning light meant something, I would tell you the old woman at checkout looked upset when Kendra put the board on the table, or that the fluorescent lights flickered, or that my Aunt Denise crossed herself. Nothing like that happened. The cashier, who had a hearing aid and 2 band-aids on her forearm, just said games were half price after noon and asked if we wanted a plastic sack. Denise didn't even notice the board. She was too busy trying to keep Father On from carrying the donation cash box by himself, because his knees were bad and everybody knew it except him. We would probably have taken the board home, laughed at it twice, and left it on top of the fridge until the tape peeled off if our power had not gone out that night. The outage covered 3 blocks after some transformer popped in the alley behind the laundromat. Summer heat settled into the apartment almost instantly. The washer hookups in the closet gave off this damp metal smell when the air stopped moving. Kendra lit 3 tea lights in old salsa jars because the flashlight on her phone was at 9%. I opened both front windows even though all that did was let in the smell of hot asphalt and somebody's cigarette smoke from the sidewalk. Our downstairs neighbour Louis knocked around 9 carrying a warm 2-litre of ginger ale and asking if our refrigerator was as dead as his. Louis is one of those details that proves real life doesn't care about narrative economy. He matters here because he saw part of it, not because he completes any kind of arc. He was 28 maybe, worked night stocking at Maya, or black nail polish with the tips chipped off, and had an ex-boyfriend who seemed to text him only when he wanted money or emotional labour. Louis was funny in a way that made even rude things sound affectionate. He had once watched Kendra wax a girl's brows in our living room while eating dry Honey Nut Cheerios from a mug and giving unsolicited relationship advice. He called the board Recession Demon Hasbro. We used a low plastic storage tote as a table, because everything else in the apartment was either too high or covered in unfolded laundry. Kendra made a whole performance out of setting the board down. Candle in the middle, windows cracked, sweating cans of ginger ale leaving rings on the tote lid. She asked if we should use a shot glass instead of the planchette, because she didn't trust the original plastic piece. Louis said if we were going to contact evil we should at least use the matching equipment, so we used the actual planchette, the clear one with the oval window, and put 2 fingers on it because all 3 of us had seen enough movies to know the props even if we didn't believe the premise. The beginning was embarrassing, which I think matters. If I skip straight to the creepy part, it sounds cleaner than it was. We were not grave and reverent. We were bored and sticky and a little giddy from having our routines broken. Louis asked if his ex was going to stop being a parasite. Kendra asked whether the electricity would come back before her Greek yogurt spoiled. I asked where I'd put the debit card I'd been looking for since Tuesday. The board barely moved at first, tiny drifts, little jerks that stopped before landing on anything useful. We laughed every time it twitched because the obvious explanation was that somebody was pushing and nobody wanted to admit it first. Then I asked again about the debit card, more clearly this time. The planchette slid left so cleanly it made my scalp tighten. It didn't wobble or stutter. It went to M, then A, then I, then L, then slot. Mail, slot, Louis read. That made no sense for half a second. Then I remembered the outgoing slot in the brass mailboxes by the lobby door downstairs. I had checked my purse, my motel apron, the car console, the bathroom shelf, even the freezer because I once lost my keys in the freezer somehow. I had not checked the outgoing mail slot because why would I? Louis took his fingers off first and said absolutely not. Kendra said, "Go look then." I went down in the dark with my phone at 4% and found my debit card wedged face down behind a junk pizza coupon in the outgoing mail slot. There are probably still 10 rational explanations for that. Maybe I had set the card on top of a stack of mail and it slid in. Maybe one of us had seen it earlier without noticing. Maybe I unconsciously knew and pushed the planchette there. I understand all of that. I said all of that out loud when I came back upstairs, but the mood had shifted anyway. Not in a thunderclap movie way. In the worse, smaller way where a joke stops being funny and nobody wants to be the one who says so. Kendra sat back down and looked at the board differently. Not scared exactly. Cornered. She asked, "All right, if somebody knows something about me that I don't, what's the name I should know? Louis said that was too vague. Kendra said so as being adopted. Welcome to my evening." Then she put her fingers back on the planchette before either of us could answer. It moved right away. Imogene. The name sat there in the little oval window while the three of us stared at it. Louise was the first to say it out loud. Imogene. Kendra frowned. "Do you know an Imogene?" I shook my head. Louise shook his head. Kendra laughed once, but it was the wrong kind of laugh. The kind you hear when somebody's standing on a stair they thought had one more step under it. "That has to be fake," she said. "That's a ghost from a nursing home." Then, before either of us moved, the planchette pulled again on its own momentum and landed on Morning. "Morning." Louis took his fingers off so fast the tote lid jumped. He said he was done, and for once he sounded exactly as serious as the words were. Kendra asked if he was messing with us. He swore on his mother's blood pressure medication that he was not. Then his phone buzzed, he looked at the screen, and the whole weird night broke for a second because he said, "Of course, Emilio picks now to apologise," suck, and walked into the hall to take the call. I never saw him put his fingers on that board again. Kendra and I sat alone with the tea lights guttering. The apartment had gone quiet in that strange outage way, where you realise how much machine noise usually fills a building. No washers turning, no refrigerator cycling, no TV through the wall. Just traffic far off and somebody thumping around on the fire escape. "You know what's bothering me," Kendra said finally. "If it was trying to freak me out, it worked harder than it had to." "What do you mean?" "If it wanted to pick a dead lady name, why not Gladys? Why not Rose? Why Imogene?" I didn't have an answer. We folded the board shut and put it on top of the microwave. Louis came back in 5 minutes later, complaining that his ex had only called to ask if he still had the air fryer basket. He asked if we were continuing. Kendra said no. The power came back at 11:13. We ate half-melted Klondike bars over the sink and tried to talk about anything else. Kendra didn't bring the board up the next morning. She didn't bring it up at noon either. When I woke after my motel shift and found her sitting cross-legged on the couch in one of my old college sweatshirts eating dry cinnamon toast crunch out of a glass measuring cup. She didn't say the name until that night after she got off work and we were both brushing our teeth side by side because our bathroom was too narrow for privacy. She said, "If I ask Sharon for the packet again, do you think she'll freak out?" I spat toothpaste and said, "Probably, but she freaks out whether you ask softly or not, so you might as well ask." Kendra asked for the packet. Sharon handed it over but cried while doing it, which made Kendra furious enough to circle all the way back to numb. The packet had almost nothing helpful in it. A case number, a defunct agency, a city. One social worker note that mentioned the birth mother was 19, and the maternal grandmother believed the placement was temporary even though it wasn't. That last detail bothered Kendra more than anything else. She read it aloud twice. Temporary, like there had once been a version where somebody planned to come get her. She spent 2 nights doing internet searches at our kitchen table, with 5 tabs open and a legal pad full of names, old addresses and guest family links. This was back when social media still let you find half a person's life through 3 tagged photos and a careless cousin. She found a woman named Paula Dennison outside Springfield, whose age fit and whose public posts included one thing that made Kendra sit up hard enough to hit her knee on the table. A comment under a Mother's Day post from another woman. "Thinking of your mama today too. Love you." The other woman's profile picture was too small to make out much, but the display name was P. Dennison. Paula's mother, maybe. No first name visible. Kendra said she wasn't going to call, then she wrote the number down anyway. 3 days passed before she did it. That is another part I think people imagine differently. They imagine instant obsession. It wasn't that. It was ordinary life shoving itself around a bad thought until the bad thought found a gap. I worked 2 overnights in a row because a co-worker's kid had hand, foot and mouth. Kendra picked up a Saturday bridal party at the Lash Studio and came home smelling like setting spray and vanilla lotion, dead tired and mad because one bridesmaid had tipped in prayer cards. We ate takeout lo mein out of the cartons and watched a home renovation show where a couple spent $40,000 to make a kitchen look intentionally unfinished. Then Kendra took the paper with Paula's number on it from the junk drawer, smoothed it flat and said, "If I don't do it now, I'll think about it all week." She called from the parking lot because she said she couldn't breathe upstairs. I went with her because of course I did. We sat in her Corolla with the doors open, our feet on the asphalt and mosquitoes gathering under the dome light every time she tapped the phone screen. There was a guy on the next block trying to teach somebody to drive stick and stalling every 30 feet. I remember that because when you are waiting for something life-changing to happen, the world keeps doing its dumb little side business anyway. Paula answered on the fourth ring. Kendra almost hung up when she heard the voice. I saw it happen in her face. All her joking armour went clean off at once. She said hi, then nothing for 5 solid seconds. Paula said hello again, sharper this time, like she was already bracing for a scam or a wrong number or somebody from a hospital. Kendra finally said her first name, and that she thought there was a chance Paula had given birth to her in 1999 through the Mid-State Placement Office. Paula did not melt or cry or say she had been waiting her whole life. She said, "Who gave you this number?" Kendra said she found it herself. Paula asked what she wanted. Kendra looked at me then, not for permission, just because she needed another face in the car. She said, "I just have one question, and I know this is going to sound insane." Paula said, "Try me," Kendra said. "Does the name Imogene mean anything to you?" The whole car changed. That is the closest language I have for it. Not the air, not the weather, the shape of the moment. Paula made a sound that was not exactly a gasp and not exactly a sob, more like somebody had slapped a hand over her mouth too late. Then she said, "Who told you that name?" Kendra's eyes snapped to mine. Paula said it again, louder. "Who told you that name?" Kendra said nobody told her. She said she got it from a board game and knew how stupid that sounded and just needed Paula to answer yes or no. There was a long scrape on the line, like Paula had put the phone down badly and picked it back up. Then she said, "That's my mother's name. She died this morning at 7:42. Kendra went white. I'd been holding my own breath so hard my chest hurt. Paula kept talking in this shaky, angry, disbelieving rush. She asked if Sharon had tracked her down, if this was some kind of sick joke, if somebody from hospice had said something they shouldn't have. Kendra kept saying she didn't know any hospice and had never heard that name before 3 nights ago. Finally Paula said, "My mother died this morning and I have not posted it anywhere. Not anywhere. So you tell me right now who put that in your head." Kendra started crying then, which almost scared me more than the phone call. Not because crying itself is shocking, because Kendra only cried when something had gotten all the way past reason. She said she didn't know. She said she was sorry. She said maybe she should not have called. Paula, sounding suddenly as tired as a collapsed tent, said, "No, wait," and asked where Kendra lived. What she knew. Whether Sharon had ever told her anything about the family. Kendra answered in pieces. Paula answered in pieces too. By the end of 15 minutes, we knew only a few things for sure. Paula had been 19. Her mother Imogene had wanted Kendra kept in the family. The placement happened anyway. Paula had never fully cut contact with Sharon the way the paperwork made it sound, but most of the contact had been tense and brief and filtered through the agency at first. Over the years it had narrowed to almost nothing because everybody involved thought the others were making it harder than it had to be. And Imogene, according to Paula, had spent the last month in hospice care saying strange things about a girl she was not going to see until after she was dead. When Kendra hung up, she bent forward over the steering wheel and laughed once like she might be about to be sick. I said maybe Paula posted it somewhere private. Maybe a cousin told a cousin who told a friend. Maybe the name had been in the packet and you saw it without realizing. Kendra wiped her face with both hands and said, "Then why did it say morning? I still don't have a clean answer to that." The next week was not one long ghost montage. It was a mess of logistics and emotion, and people reacting badly in believable ways. Sharon was furious Kendra had called Paula at all. Paula was furious Sharon had not mentioned that Imogene's name had somehow reached Kendra the day she died. Kendra was furious at everybody, which was easier than deciding which part hurt most. I got dragged into phone calls because I had heard Paula on speaker, and was therefore apparently a witness. Lewis asked once what the verdict was on Recession Demon Hasbro. I said, "Not funny." He took the hint and never asked again. Paula called back 2 nights later and invited Kendra to the visitation. That is the sentence that made Sharon lose it. She said nobody should throw an adopted child into a funeral parlour full of strangers, because a dying woman had a fixation. Paula said Imogene was not a fixation, and Kendra was not a child. Kendra said she was going whether either of them liked it or not, and asked me to come because she did not want her first meeting with half her biological family to happen alone beside a casket. I said yes before I fully thought through what that meant. The funeral home was in a town 40 minutes south, one of those places where every fast food sign looks too bright against all the flat beige storefronts around it. Kendra wore black jeans and the widow cardigan from the rummage sale because apparently she thought irony still functioned. We got drive-through coffees on the way and neither of us drank more than 3 sips. Her knee bounced the whole drive. Mine would have, if I hadn't been too busy trying to keep us between the lines because Kendra kept changing the music and then muting it. Paula looked like Kendra in the same way you can recognise a person in a drawing that only used 6 lines. Same chin, same brows, same irritated mouth, different life. She hugged Kendra too early, like her body made the decision before her brain did, and then both of them pretended it had not happened. Paula's husband shook my hand too hard and forgot my name twice in 10 minutes. A woman with Kendra's nose but Paula's eyes stood by the guestbook eating wintergreen mints one after another and staring without shame. Families do not become graceful just because death is in the room. Imogene herself looked smaller than I expected. Everybody always says that about the dead, but it was true. The funeral home had done the usual work, smoothing and tinting and arranging, but she still looked unmistakably like a person who had recently been in pain. Her hands were folded around a rosary. She had a gold cross pin on the collar of her navy dress and a deep dent above her lip, like dentures had changed the way her face rested over time. Kendra stood beside me and whispered, "I don't know her," in a tone that sounded like an accusation against the entire building. The strange part wasn't seeing Imogene. The strange part was the box. Paula brought it out after the visitation when most people had gone to the fellowship room for ham sandwiches and sheet cake. It was a blue floral hat box tied with a shoelace because the original ribbon had broken. She said her mother had kept it in the closet by her bed and grabbed for it every time hospice staff tried to clear things. Inside were birthday cards. 15 of them at least, maybe more. Some sealed, some not. All addressed to Kendra by her first name and middle initial, then crossed out on later cards and replaced with another first name Kendra had never heard before. There were also school photo-size pictures of Paula at 19 holding a blanket-wrapped newborn, a silver baby bracelet with no engraving, and a spiral notebook with the front cover curled from use. Paula said the notebook was mostly nonsense by the end. Medication notes, grocery lists for groceries nobody was buying, hymn titles. But the pages from the last 6 months had one repeated theme. Imogene thought Kendra was trying to get to her but couldn't do it directly. Paula said she had assumed that was grief and age and hospice dreams talking. Then she opened the notebook to a page she had marked with a pharmacy receipt and handed it to Kendra. I only saw it over her shoulder. The handwriting leaned hard right and shook in places, but it was readable. She is close now, not from the old place. Upstairs over washing machines. Girl with her works nights with coffee smell. If she asks by my name, do not let her use the glass eye twice. Kendra read it twice. Then she handed the notebook to me without a word and walked into the bathroom. I looked at Paula and asked if she had ever told her mother where we lived. Paula said no. Sharon definitely had not. Sharon hated even knowing our address because she said our alley parking would get Kendra murdered. I tried very hard not to look around the funeral home for hidden cameras or cousins with mean senses of humour, because none of that helped. What helped even less was the last line, the glass eye. The planchette on the travel board had a clear oval window in the middle, a glass eye if you wanted to describe it in the most unsettling possible way. Kendra came out of the bathroom looking dry-eyed and furious. She said she wanted copies of everything. Paula said not everything, not yet. They had their first real fight 4 feet from the casket. Kendra said she was the one who had gotten called in by a dead name through a toy board, and maybe she had earned the right to not be managed for one evening. Paula said grief was not a courtroom and nobody earned anything by arriving late. Then Kendra said, late according to who? And I thought for a second one of them might actually slap the other. What happened instead was worse and more ordinary. They both calmed down too fast. People who are about to become family again often do that when there are witnesses. We left with photocopies of 3 notebook pages and 2 birthday cards. Kendra did not sleep that night. I know because I didn't either. She sat at the kitchen table with the copies spread out, reading the pages until the toner smudged her fingertips grey. Around 2 in the morning, she opened one of the birthday cards. Imogene's handwriting covered both sides. It was not beautiful. It was chatty, uneven, and full of little useless details about tomato plants and church raffle baskets and how Paula had cut her own bangs again. Halfway down the inside page there was one line that made Kendra stop breathing long enough for me to hear it. "I hope when you are grown nobody makes you apologise for asking where you came from." Kendra folded the card shut and said, "Sharon lied to me." I said, "Maybe Sharon protected you badly." "Those are not the same thing." Kendra said they are if you're the one missing the information. Then she got up, reached for the cupboard above the microwave, and took the board down. I told her no immediately. She asked why. Because a dying woman wrote something creepy in a notebook. Because a stranger knew our apartment was over washing machines. Because the board had already done one impossible thing. Because I did not want to sit in our hot kitchen at 2 in the morning and let a dead grandmother use that stupid plastic window as a doorway into a family feud older than either of us. Pick one. Kendra said she only wanted to ask one question. I said, "Ask Paula." She said, "Paula does not answer like somebody who wants the truth." I said, "Maybe dead people aren't famous for that either." She put the board away. For the night. The weeks after the funeral were the ugliest part because they were almost all human. Kendra started talking to Paula every day. Then she started fighting with Sharon every other day. Sharon admitted there had been more contact than Kendra ever knew. Not secret visits or dramatic doorstep scenes. Letters, a couple of phone calls that ended badly. One time Imogene had sent a quilt Sharon never gave Kendra because it felt like a hand reaching through a closed door. Sharon insisted the agency had advised distance because Imogene was too unstable and too convinced the adoption would reverse. So as Paula insisted Sharon had liked being the only gatekeeper in the situation and had hidden more than she needed to. I think both of them were telling the truth from inside their own damage. Kendra got meaner in small ways. She missed a Saturday bridal booking because she spent the morning on the phone with Paula digging through county property records trying to figure out which house Imogene had lived in before hospice. She snapped at me for washing one of the birthday cards with my clean hands but damp fingers. She started rubbing Vicks under her nose before bed because Paula mentioned Imogene used it for everything, and the smell made Kendra feel, in her words, less scrambled. That smell got into our pillowcases and bath towels and bathroom mirror. Then the board started giving her things she could use. Yeah, I want to be very precise here because this is the part where I still argue with myself. I never saw it launch across the room. I never saw a chair move by itself. I saw Kendra sit down alone at the table 3 nights after the funeral, place 2 fingers on the planchette, and ask where the silver bracelet from the hat box had come from because Paula had said she didn't recognise it. I saw the board spell blue tin. I heard Kendra laugh like she was angry at her own body. The next afternoon Paula called to say she'd found a blue biscuit tin on the top shelf of a hall closet at Imogene's old house while looking for funeral shoes. Inside was a hospital bracelet with Kendra's birth time, the missing half of the baby bracelet and a packet of photographs nobody knew existed. That could have been coincidence. Blue tin is not exactly a lock code. Plenty of old women keep keepsakes in blue tins. 2 nights later, Kendra asked where the quilt Sharon had hidden was. The board said cedar bench. Sharon, offended beyond measure, swore she had not hidden any quilt in any cedar bench. Then she called back 20 minutes later, crying because there had in fact been a cedar storage bench in the garage she forgot existed, and the quilt was inside under Christmas wrapping paper. That was the point where I stopped wanting to be in the apartment with the board at all. Kendra took that personally. She said I only liked the story when it was weird in a fun way. I said there is nothing fun about watching her turn every family problem into a message board for the dead. She said maybe I was just scared of being wrong. I said maybe she was scared of being ordinary. We did not speak for most of the next day except to ask who had used the last of the dish soap. Lewis came over once during that stretch and left after 10 minutes because Kendra, half distracted by a conversation with Paula, absent-mindedly called him Sweetheart Bug while handing him a bottle opener. He laughed at first and then asked where that came from. Kendra said nowhere. Later that night, Paula mentioned offhand that Imogene used to call everybody Sweetheart Bug. Lewis never said anything rude about it. He just stopped dropping by as much. People do that around other people's grief when the grief starts to feel contagious. The worst night happened in September. Kendra had spent the whole afternoon at Sharon's house going through old agency paperwork because Sharon finally admitted there was one sealed envelope she had never opened. Not from Paula, from Imogene. It was mailed 11 days before the funeral, and had our exact apartment address written on the front in shaky block letters. No return address, no explanation for how she had it. Inside was a single card, blank except for one sentence. If she asks by my name, do not let her use the glass eye twice. Sharon said she didn't tell Kendra right away because by then the board stuff was already upsetting everyone and she didn't want to add lighter fluid. Kendra came home with the card in her purse and this awful flat determination in her face. She set the card on the table, she set the board beside it. Then she told me she needed to know what use it twice meant. I told her if a dead woman sends you a warning from inside a family disaster and you cannot even tell whether she is warning you about herself or about something using her name, maybe the smart move is not to test the language. Kendra said smart moves had not gotten her much so far. We argued in circles until she said the one thing she knew would corner me. If this were happening to you, would you really walk away now? That is such a dirty, effective question, because the honest answer was no. So I sat down with her one last time. We used the board on the kitchen table instead of the tote. The apartment smelled like Vicks and fried onions from the sandwich shop vent. Somebody in the laundromat downstairs was running all 3 commercial dryers at once, so the whole floor had a faint vibrating hum under it. Kendra put the warning card face down by her elbow like evidence in a trial. We set our fingers on the planchette and for a second nothing happened. Kendra said, "If this is Imogene, what did you mean by use it twice?" The planchette moved harder than I had ever felt it move before, not to letters, to yes. Kendra swallowed. "Are you Imogene?" "No." I took my fingers off right then, but the plastic kept drifting under Kendra's fingertips alone. "Name," she whispered. "It's spelled Mother. I told her to stop. She didn't. She asked mother of who. It went to Kendra's birth name, the one crossed out on the cards, the one neither Sharon nor Paula had ever said aloud in front of me. 4 letters, then goodbye, just like that. Kendra jerked her hand back so violently the planchette clacked against the table leg and fell on the floor. We both stared at it. The oval window had cracked straight through the middle. That sounds like a made-up flourish, I know, cheap plastic cracks, but it had not fallen far enough to break like that. Even if it had, the timing was bad enough that I did not care what physics said. Kendra slept in Paula's guest room that night. She texted me at 2:13 to say she couldn't be in the apartment with the broken thing. I put the board in a trash bag and left it in the alley dumpster before sunrise. The next afternoon it was back on our kitchen chair. I do not know how. No, really. I had taken it down myself in pyjama pants and motel slippers, dropped it between a cracked crock pot and a box of wet paper, and watched the sanitation truck lift that very dumpster at 10:30 because I was awake and angry and happened to be making toast when it came. By 3 p.m, the board was on our chair with the cracked planchette on top of it, like somebody had laid out evidence for me. Maybe Kendra bought another one. Maybe Louis was playing the longest, meanest joke of his life, even though that is not him at all. Maybe I lost my mind for a day. I cannot prove otherwise. All I know is I wrapped the board in 2 trash bags, drove it to the county transfer station, and paid cash to dump it in the mixed debris bin myself. Kendra moved out 2 weeks later. Not because of one dramatic final fight, or because too many things had gone rotten in the same small apartment and there was no way to sort them. She spent more and more nights with Paula, less and less time at the lash studio, and one evening she said it would be easier for everyone if she just took her clothes and the milk crate bookshelf and made the shift official. Sharon blamed Paula. Paula blamed Sharon. Kendra blamed both of them, and then blocked each one in rotation depending on the day. We stayed in contact, but not the way we had been before. Something about getting folded into a person's origin story changes the temperature of a friendship. You stop being roommates with shared groceries and start being one of the witnesses. The last time I saw her in person was 6 months later in a Maya parking lot. She looked healthier, heavier in the face, sleeping more maybe. She had cut her hair blunt at the jaw. She hugged me first this time. Then she told me Paula had found more letters, that Sharon had finally brought over the quilt, that nobody knew what to do with the notebook, and that she had stopped trying to use the board after the cracked planchette night, because she no longer believed whatever answered had been her grandmother. "Do you think it was her at the beginning, though?" she asked me. I said, "I don't know." She said, "Me neither." Then she got in her car and left before I could ask whether she was all right in any useful sense. We still text a couple times a year, birthdays mostly. once when Paula had gallbladder surgery, once when Sharon's dog died. There is no clean ending where Kendra embraces both mothers and heals the old wound, or where she rejects them both and becomes stronger in a way that can fit on a quote graphic. Real families are not good at giving you catharsis. They are good at leaving you with too many versions of the same story. What I have is this. A cheap travel Ouija board bought in a church basement said Imogene and morning before my friend called her birth mother and found out her grandmother had died that same morning. A notebook written before the funeral warned us not to use the glass eye twice after the name came through. Something on the board later said it was not Imogene, and knew Kendra's birth name anyway. The planchette cracked down the middle. I threw the board away twice, once it came back. And there is one other thing, which is why I still do not step into rummage sales. About a year after Kendra moved out, I helped Aunt Denise carry leftover donations back into that same church basement where we found the board. I'd almost convinced myself the whole thing had started from coincidence, plus family secrets, plus two women desperate enough to treat any strange pattern like destiny. Then I bent down to lift a box of greeting cards and saw one loose envelope at the bottom. My address was on it. Not our old apartment. My current address from the duplex I had moved into after Kendra left. Written in the same hard-leaning block letters as the warning card Sharon kept. No stamp, no return address, nothing inside. I put it back in the box and carried the whole thing upstairs like my arms were full of glass. I never told Aunt Denise. I never told Kendra because I could not decide whether it would comfort her or open something again. Maybe somebody found an old address book. Maybe Sharon or Paula mailed it and lost their nerve and will die denying it. Maybe there is a version that makes perfect earthly sense. I just know I do not say dead people's names over plastic windows anymore. I do not let friends joke about contacting whoever might be hanging around. And if I smell burnt coffee and dust and rose perfume coming from a church basement, I keep walking until the smell is gone. When my son drags one of the kitchen chairs across the tile, it makes almost the exact same squeal as the plastic planchette from the board I used with my first husband. That sound goes through me before I can stop it. Not because I think the chair is haunted. Not because I believe every bad thing in my life was mapped out by a piece of glow-in-the-dark cardboard from a drugstore. It gets me because the board was right in exactly the ways I have never been able to file away as coincidence without feeling dishonest. It named my husband's affair before I knew there was one. It told me I would never finish college, which still stings in a stupid deep way no matter how adult I try to be about it. And it said I would have a son back when I was 20, broke, married to the wrong man, and openly saying I didn't want kids at all. I know how that sounds, and I hate that sentence enough not to use it again. So let me put it the plain way. I'm not trying to win anybody over. I'm 32 years old. I work in admissions at an outpatient imaging centre. I have a 7-year-old boy who leaves apple cores in cup holders and asks questions while I'm brushing my teeth. I have student debt from classes I never got to turn into a degree, and I still keep a cheap plastic planchette wrapped in an old Target receipt at the back of my silverware drawer because I've thrown it away twice, and it keeps ending up inside things I know I did not put it in. When the board first showed up, I was 20 and living in married student housing behind the community college with my husband Dylan. We had been together since senior year and got married fast for reasons that made sense to us then and sound embarrassing now. Some of it was love. Some of it was wanting out of our parents' houses. Some of it was that Dylan had decent enough pay doing cabinet installs with his uncle, and I had just started prerequisites for nursing, and everybody around us liked the idea of us becoming one stable little, hard-working unit before either of us had actually tested what we were like under strain. The apartment was tiny and somehow drafty and airless at the same time. The bathroom fan made a grinding noise like it had marbles in it. The blinds in the bedroom had one bent slat that let the parking lot light stripe the bed all night. We owned 2 matching towels because my aunt bought them for the wedding, and everything else came from thrift stores, hand-me-downs, or the clearance aisle at Walmart. I worked mornings at a tanning salon desk and went to classes in the afternoon. Dylan left before sunrise most days because his uncle liked to start jobs early, especially if they were driving out to subdivisions where the homeowners watched you from the window and complained if a truck sat in the driveway after dark. We were not miserable. That part matters too. People want affairs to happen only inside marriages that are already an active crime scene. Ours was more ordinary than that. We fought about bills, whose turn it was to buy toilet paper, whether Dylan's wet work socks had to live on the bathroom floor, the usual dumb things. We also ate frozen pizzas on the couch and watched forensic reruns and laughed at the same local furniture commercials. He used to stop at this gas station by campus and bring me the weird blue raspberry energy drink I liked before anatomy exams. I used to iron his good shirts on the floor because we didn't own a proper ironing board. We were just young and underbuilt and easier to push off course than either of us knew. The board came into our apartment because of Janelle. Janelle was my classmate from biology lab. One of those girls who always had a Fountain Diet Coke, 3 lip products in her bag, and a family dramatic enough to fill long drives by itself. She lived in the next building with her cousin Trevor, who was either in HVAC school or between HVAC schools depending on the month. 2 nights before Halloween she came over carrying a grocery sack full of clearance candy, one of those fake spiderweb bags, and a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board she'd bought at a 24-hour pharmacy because she thought it would be funny to do a cheap little apartment séance after the campus costume crawl. It was not an elegant object. It was glossy purple-black cardboard with neon green letters and a plastic planchette so light it felt like a fast food toy. The edges still smelled faintly like shrink wrap and warehouse dust. I made fun of it the second I saw it. Dylan said if a demon wanted us, it would probably pick somebody with a better couch. Trevor said he hoped any spirit we contacted knew where his missing debit card was because he was down to $6 and a Speedway rewards card. We did not sit down with reverence. We sat down with vodka lemonade in mismatched cups and a bowl of fun-sized candy bars between us. Janelle had drawn eyeliner stars over her brows because she said it looked witchy and just made her look tired. I was wearing scrub pants and one of Dylan's old hoodies because I had a pharmacology quiz the next morning and wasn't going anywhere. Dylan smelled like sawdust and Irish spring. That is one of those useless details that stayed. So did the fact that Trevor had brought buffalo chicken dip in a slow cooker that burned around the edges because he forgot to stir it. Janelle turned off the overhead light and left only the stove light and a pumpkin-shaped string of battery lights she had wrapped around the TV stand. The whole thing was ridiculous. We asked stupid questions first. Trevor asked whether his ex Kayla still keyed his truck. Janelle asked if her professor was sleeping with the dean. I asked if I was going to pass the pharmacology quiz because I had mixed up 2 antihypertensives in my notes and was sliding toward that special kind of exam panic where you start forgetting your own name. The board moved, but not well, little drifts, half starts. Trevor accused Janelle of steering with her acrylic nails. Dylan accused Trevor of being too drunk to touch anything lightly. We laughed the way people do when they want the joke to stay a joke. Then Janelle, because she liked escalation as a hobby, said, "All right, let's ask a real one." She looked at me and said, "Ask about your man." I rolled my eyes. Dylan said absolutely not in a voice that was still playful. So I asked the question halfway as a dare and halfway because married people are stupid with dares. What is the biggest thing my husband hasn't told me? The planchette moved so fast Trevor barked out a curse and thought somebody had shoved it. P-I-G-E, Page, Janelle read. I laughed because what else was I supposed to do? Who's Page, Dylan? Dylan did something I only recognised later. He smiled a beat too late. Just enough delay to show there had been real feeling before the expression showed up to cover it. Nobody, he said. Probably the waitress from Roosters who hates Trevor. Trevor said her name was Melissa and everyone knew that. I looked at Dylan again. He was still smiling, but one side of his mouth had tightened. It could have been irritation at the question. It could have been the vodka. It could have been nothing. At the time I let the moment slide because the whole point of asking was not to mean it too much. Janelle slapped the table and said, "See, this is why you do seances with married people. I should have let it end there." Instead I asked another one. Do I at least finish school? The planchette dragged to N, then E, then V, E, R. Never. Trevor booed like we were at a bad comedy show. Janelle said this board is anti-education. I felt my face go hot in a way that had nothing to do with the room. School was the part of my life I was still defending against everybody's soft little doubts. And Dylan had a job. Dylan had a trade. Dylan had an uncle who called him boss when he wanted free labour. I had prerequisites and deadlines and a bunch of older relatives who kept asking whether it might be easier to become a dental assistant instead. Before I could say anything else, Janelle said, "Ask if you have kids." I said I don't want kids. She said exactly, "Ask if the dead know that." So I did, rolling my eyes to prove I did not care. Will I have kids? The planchette went to B, then O, then Y, boy. That was the one that made me laugh for real. Not because it was funny, because it was so off. I'd been saying for a year that if I ever had kids, which I doubted, I would want a girl because girls talked, and boys launched themselves off furniture and ended up in emergency rooms with Legos in their noses. My own brothers had set a vacant lot on fire twice. The idea of me with a son felt comically mismatched. Dylan took his fingers off first after that. He said the board was officially corny, and he needed to shower because he had drywall dust in places dust should not go. Janelle tried to keep the mood up, but it was gone. Trevor packed up the slow cooker. I put the board back in its box and slid it onto the top pantry shelf behind cereal boxes. Because I had a quiz and dishes in the sink and no desire to turn a 4-question joke into a full apartment mythology, if you ask me now when I first knew about Paige, the honest answer is that the board was not the only clue. It was just the first clue that didn't let me explain itself away as easily after the fact. The second clue was Dylan's overreaction. For the next few days he kept bringing it up in little annoyed bursts, not because he believed in the board, but because he said Janelle liked to stir things up and I should stop letting her get in my head. That was strange in itself because I was not acting suspicious. I had a quiz, then a lab practical, then 2 tanning salon shifts where the stand-up bed decided to throw an error code every time the door shut. I barely had time to be in my own head, let alone let Janelle set up camp in it. But Dylan kept swatting at the moment like a mosquito. He'd say stuff like, "You know there isn't a Paige," or a "right," while brushing his teeth. Or he'd mention how Trevor probably pushed the thing while looking at his phone instead of at me. That kind of pre-defense starts to sound like guilt once you know what it belongs to. At the time, it mostly just irritated me. Then I saw the name again. Not in a lipstick-stained shirt collar or some dramatic text preview while he slept. It was smaller than that, which made it worse. Dylan had left a folded grocery receipt in his jeans pocket and asked me to check if there was enough cash for gas because his uncle was paying him late again. On the back of the receipt, in Dylan's handwriting, was a phone number and the word Paige, with a little underline under it. I stood in our kitchen staring at it for a full minute. Then I told myself there were normal reasons for a man to have a woman's number in his pocket. Customer, supplier, somebody's sister who sold appliances. I nearly believed that until Dylan came home and I held the receipt up and watched the exact same thing happen to his face that had happened when the board spelled the name. The tiny pause, the delayed smile. "Who's Paige?" I asked. He said a designer at one of the cabinet showrooms. He said she had texted him about a back-ordered hinge finish because his uncle never answered unknown numbers. He said the reason he was annoyed about the board was because now the coincidence was going to turn into a whole thing if I let it. He said whole thing in the tired, superior tone men use when they want you to feel childish before you've even decided what you feel. I wanted peace more than I wanted victory, so I let him have that. That is the part I regret almost as much as the later stuff. Not because I should have become a detective right then. Because I knew I was swallowing something sharp to keep the evening manageable, and I did it anyway. The weeks after that got crowded and ugly in ordinary ways. Midterms, rent, Dylan's uncle promising one paycheck and handing over another, Janelle breaking up with a guy from respiratory therapy, and then getting back with him 2 days later because he sent edible arrangements to the lab. I kept the receipt in my farm book for no reason I could explain. Once in class, it slid out onto the floor, and the girl next to me picked it up, read Paige out loud by accident, and handed it back without comment. I laughed and said grocery list code. She nodded like she didn't care. I still think about her face because it had that blank kindness people wear when they suspect you are trying not to embarrass yourself. I also started doing one thing that made the board's second answer more likely to come true whether it was supernatural or not. I got distracted. Not all at once, but enough. I spent too much time checking Dylan's mood, replaying his wording, looking at his phone screen when it lit up on the coffee table. I bombed a quiz because I had stayed up half the night listening to him shower and trying to decide if I was pathetic for wondering whether he smelled like somebody else. I missed half a lab because I walked back to the apartment after class and then all the way back to campus because I could not remember whether I had left the stove on. I told myself I was tired. I was tired. I was also getting slowly pulled sideways by a problem I did not want to name. The thing that finally broke it open was not romance, it was logistics. Dylan asked to borrow my car one Friday because his truck was in the shop getting brakes done. I said yes because his job sites moved all over and I could walk to campus that day anyway. Around noon I got a call from the bursar's office saying my payment plan had bounced, and if I did not come in by 4 they were going to put a hold on my classes for next semester. I had set the autopay from the joint checking account Dylan used too. He was supposed to have deposited his half of rent and bills that morning. He had not. I called him twice, no answer. I called again and got voicemail. Then I did the thing people always act above until they are young and scared and sharing a checking account with the wrong person. I logged into the account from the campus library computer and scrolled the transactions. Lunch charges 3 times that week at the same bar and grill near one of Dylan's job sites. A flower shop purchase for $68, 2 cash withdrawals I didn't recognise, and 1 transfer from savings to checking that should not have happened because our savings had exactly one purpose, which was my tuition shortfall. I left campus and took a bus out to the strip where that bar and grill sat because panic makes you practical in the dumbest possible directions. I told myself I was going there to find him about the money. Maybe I even half believed that. His truck was parked around the side of the building. So was a grey Corolla with a bumper sticker that said "Dog Mums do it better." I went inside with my backpack still on and saw Dylan in a booth by the window with a woman I knew immediately was Paige, not because he introduced us, or because she looked villainous in some satisfying way, but because there is a posture people have with each other when they have already crossed the line and are tired from keeping track of it. She was leaning in with one elbow on the table. He was smiling with his whole face, not the delayed apology smile he wore at me. There were flowers in a paper sleeve on the bench beside him. Paige looked up first. She did not look shocked. That is still one of the details that catches in me. She looked tired and annoyed, like the truth had been delayed and had finally shown up. Dylan stood up so fast the booth rattled. I don't remember the exact order of the next 2 minutes. I remember Paige saying, "I thought he already told you." I remember Dylan saying, "Can we not do this here?" which is a sentence so many guilty men apparently share like a rental car. I remember dropping my backpack on the floor and telling him my tuition had bounced because he bought flowers for somebody in a place with fake ferns. I remember the waitress by the soda fountain pretending not to watch and failing. And I remember Paige, to her credit or discredit depending on your angle, looking at Dylan with genuine disgust when she realised he had lied to both of us about the timing. The affair was not years long. That almost made me angrier. 4 months, maybe 5. Long enough for secrets. Not long enough for any of the grand, stupid language people use to excuse themselves. They met through a showroom job, then through lunch, then through after-work drinks, then through all the usual selfish little permissions people give themselves because they think betrayal is made of large choices instead of repeated small ones. I went home and pulled the board down from the pantry shelf, not because I wanted help, because rage makes you theatrical sometimes. I set it on the counter and stared at it while water boiled over on the stove because I had forgotten I was making noodles. The same cheap plastic board, same ridiculous green letters, same planchette light enough to move when the ceiling fan hit it just right. I asked it nothing. That was the only smart thing I did all week. Dylan slept on Trevor's couch that night. Then he came back. Then he left. Then he came back with flowers as if we'd learned nothing from the first bouquet. There were apologies, half-confessions, changed versions, accusations that I was making him the villain of a life he never asked for. That last one almost impressed me with its nerve. Meanwhile, my account hold went through, the next tuition instalment failed, and I started doing math on the backs of tanning salon appointment cards to figure out whether I could stay enrolled if I picked up more desk shifts and dropped 1 science class. I did not stay enrolled. That is the blunt version. The slow version is uglier. I tried to keep going that semester, I really did. I showed up to class with concealer under my eyes and flashcards in my bag. I took the bus when Dylan had the car. I brought peanut butter crackers for lunch because they were cheap and didn't need refrigeration. But concentration is not some noble resource you can just summon because your future depends on it. Mine had been perforated. I would sit in lecture and realise I had not heard the last 8 minutes because I was thinking about Paige's face in that booth, or whether Dylan had taken our good bath towels to Trevor's place, or how many late fees stacked onto a tuition balance before you stopped being a student and started being a debt. I failed one exam by 2 points, then another by 11, Then I missed a lab entirely because Dylan texted at 6 in the morning saying he needed one of us to come sign a paper at the body shop after somebody sideswiped my car in the lot where he'd parked it overnight. He said one of us like there was still an us to split errands between. By December, my academic advisor was doing that soft, resourceful voice people use when they are trying to redirect your life without saying the word redirect. She said I could withdraw from 2 classes, preserve my GPA, and come back stronger in fall. Fall came with a rent increase, a broken molar, and a job opening at the salon for a full-time desk lead position with slightly better pay and no benefits. I took the job. Then I told myself it was temporary. Then one temporary turned into another. Dylan and I finally divorced the next summer in a courthouse annex that smelled like copier toner and floor wax. He wore the same blue button-up from our engagement photos. I wore flats because I had a blister on my left heel, and there is nothing sadder than sitting in divorce court trying not to bleed into your shoe. Paige was not there. By then she had already broken things off with him too, which did not heal me even a little, because I was not grieving some great love story. I was grieving time, money, and the version of myself that had thought she was building towards something more solid than this. The board stayed in a storage tote through all of that. I should explain why. People hear that part and assume obsession. It was pettier than that. I kept it because I did not want to look at it, and I also did not want Janelle or Trevor stumbling over it and turning the whole thing into a forever anecdote at cookouts. So I wrapped it in an old towel, shoved it in a plastic tote with winter clothes and tax papers, and forgot about it until the following spring when I went looking for my W-2 and found the planchette lying loose on top of a stack of sweatshirts. I had boxed the board with the planchette tucked inside. I know I had. Maybe it slid out. Maybe I dropped it when I moved and never noticed. Fine, but it was sitting face up with the little oval window aimed right at me as soon as I opened the lid. And I still remember the exact electric jolt that went through my scalp. I threw it in the apartment complex dumpster that night. 3 months later, when I moved to a cheaper duplex with a roommate from the salon, the board was under my spare blankets. No tote, no towel, just the board. At some point you have to decide whether you are being haunted or just becoming the kind of person who makes reality weirder by paying too much attention to it. I chose option 3, which was to shove the board into the trunk of my car under a bag of windshield fluid and stop trying to assign it a category. Life went on because it does that with rude efficiency. I picked up a second job hostessing 3 nights a week at a steakhouse where the manager called every female employee sweetheart regardless of age or mood. My roommate Talia got engaged to a cop with veneers and a fishing boat and wanted me to be happy for her more often than I naturally was. Janelle moved to Nashville with a respiratory therapist and then moved back 7 months later with a neck tattoo and no respiratory therapist. Dylan remarried within 2 years, which I found out through social media the same way you find out somebody from high school bought a pontoon boat. I tried school again at 25. That is the part that hurts most when people act like the board's second answer was just about one bad semester. It wasn't. I went back. Night classes this time, medical office administration instead of nursing because I was older and poorer and tired of pretending I still had the runway for labs, clinicals and all the hours around them. I made it through 2 semesters. I even liked it. Then my mum needed surgery and my younger brother lost his license after a DUI, and suddenly I was driving everyone everywhere, covering shifts, and paying my own tuition 1 late fee at a time. I dropped 1 class, then another, and told myself I would re-enroll after tax season. I did not. By 27, I had stopped describing myself as somebody who was in school, and started describing myself as somebody who meant to go back. If you have ever made that switch in your own language, you know exactly how ugly and quiet it feels. Marcus showed up when I was 28 and not asking for anything from the future. He was a paramedic with a chipped front tooth, and a daughter from a high school relationship who spent every other weekend at his apartment doing slime experiments on his coffee table. I met him because his ambulance crew brought a patient into the imaging centre after a transport mix-up, and he came back later with a gift card because he thought he'd been short with me at the desk. I almost threw the gift card away because I thought the gesture was corny. Then I used it on lunch, and then we started texting. And then one day he fixed the rattling fan in my car in the imaging centre parking lot without acting like I owed him or for it. I told him about Dylan early because by then I believed in boring honesty as a form of self-defence. I told him about school too. What I did not tell him, not for months, was the board. That came out on a Sunday night in February when his daughter had gone back to her mother's, We were eating takeout in my living room, and I got irrationally weird because he made a joke about us having a kid who would inherit both our bad knees. I said I wasn't having kids. He said okay. Then, because quiet acceptance is somehow more dangerous than argument when you're hiding a superstition, I told him the whole story. Not every detail of Dylan and Paige, just the bored part. Paige, never. Boy. Marcus listened without smirking. Then he said, I don't think a toy told you your life. I think maybe it said the one thing your husband was already guilty enough to flinch at and the rest got built out of damage, which was a decent answer. Maybe the decent answer. I wanted to keep it. Then I got pregnant. There is no grand irony in the mechanics of it. The birth control shot messed with my cycle, then a pharmacy delay pushed my next appointment, then 1 month later, I was standing in my bathroom at 6 a.m. staring at a test so positive it looked fake. I sat on the closed toilet and laughed for almost a full minute because my first clear feeling was not joy or terror. It was offence. The board had been right in a category where I had resented it most. Marcus was good. Better than I had trained myself to expect from men once they hear life plans shifting under them. He was scared and practical, and immediately started Googling daycare costs and SUV safety ratings like panic could be solved by specifications. I was the one who went strange, not detached, not unhappy. Strange. Every good appointment had a bad echo under it. Every milestone came with a memory of that cheap neon board sliding to boy while I laughed into a cup of vodka lemonade. At the 20-week ultrasound, the tech said there he is before I could even ask if she was sure. I started crying so hard she thought something was medically wrong. I told her I was fine. I was not fine. I was going to love my son, and I did, immediately and stupidly and with my whole body. But I could not shake the feeling that I was walking into a room somebody had shown me years earlier when I still believed I had choices untouched by old mistakes. My son Caleb was born in August, with a cone head, furious lungs, and one dark swirl of hair that stood straight up no matter what we did. Marcus cried over him. I cried over him. My mum held him and said, "Oh, he's all boy," which nearly made me laugh myself open on the recovery bed because apparently the universe had a sense of humour after all. Good things can still feel eerie when they were predicted by the wrong mouth. That is something nobody really tells you. The planchette came back into my life when Caleb was 4 months old. I was digging through the trunk for a spare burp cloth because he had thrown up down the front of himself in the grocery store parking lot and I had forgotten to restock the diaper bag. Under the windshield fluid and reusable bags was the old board, warped a little at one edge from heat, and the planchette sitting on top of it like it had been waiting for me to open the trunk with one hand while balancing a baby carrier with the other. I'd not put it there. Maybe one of my moves had. Maybe I was sleep-deprived enough to have forgotten. Maybe. New motherhood is a wonderful factory for mundane explanations because your brain is already on fire. I used that to my advantage. I took the board to the dumpster behind our building, snapped it in half over the concrete lip and dropped both pieces under somebody's torn sofa cushion. I kept the planchette. That is the embarrassing part. Not because I wanted a keepsake, because when I snapped the board, the planchette was in my pocket and I didn't realise it until later. And by the time I found it, I could not make myself throw the last piece away. It felt too much like disrespecting evidence, and too much like superstition at the same time. So I wrapped it in the receipt from the grocery store run, and shoved it into the back of my silverware drawer behind corn cob holders and soy sauce packets. That is where it lives now. Caleb is 7. Marcus and I did not last, though for reasons so boring and human they barely deserve narration. Shift work. Money. His ex-wife drama. My permanent low-grade resentment at having to build adulthood in pieces. He is still a good father. We share pick-up schedules and school expenses and the annual debate about whether Caleb is old enough for tackle football. Caleb has Marcus's chipped tooth smile and Dylan's habit of drumming fingers on tabletops, which feels cosmically rude, but probably proves only that men are built from 6 repeated gestures. I still have no degree. That answer stayed true too. I tried one more time when Caleb started preschool. One evening class, health record software. I made it through 5 weeks and then Caleb got croup twice in 1 month. Marcus picked up overtime, my manager quit, and I missed enough classes that finishing became another expensive act of pride instead of something practical. I withdrew online while eating macaroni out of the pot. I didn't even cry. That was the worst part. It had become familiar. Sometimes I think the board was never mystical at all. Maybe it threw out a name one guilty man already had in his body, a mean prediction that became more likely because I got frightened and distracted. And a boy guessed that statistically could have gone either way but hit. That explanation is available to me every day. I use it when I want to feel employable and sane. Then something small happens that I can't file. Like last year when Caleb, who had never heard the story and thought Ouija was a pronunciation of Luigi, came into the kitchen while I was unloading forks and asked what the little window thing was because he'd found the wrapped receipt in the drawer and thought it belonged to a toy telescope. I took it from him too fast. He looked at me and said, "Why does it point at people?" Or the time 3 winters ago when I opened the silverware drawer and found the receipt unwrapped, even though I fold it the same way every time. And the planchette was sitting window up over a grocery list scrap where I had written peaches, milk, diapers and Paige. I had not written Paige. That bothered me for weeks. Then I found the actual grocery list in my purse and realised I must have accidentally copied the wrong name from a patient intake sheet at work, where a woman named Paige had called twice that day about a CD of her imaging. There was a rational explanation, and I clung to it because the alternative was letting a tiny piece of plastic keep its grip on my life, 15 years after a party none of us took seriously. I do not think the board knew everything. I do not think my life was trapped under shrink wrap waiting for a pharmacy joke to open it. I think it said 3 things that turned out to be true, and whether it predicted them, exposed them, or helped shove me toward them is a question I cannot answer without lying one way or the other. What I know is smaller. I know my first husband flinched at the name Paige before I knew why he should. I know I was still enrolled in college the night a cheat board told me never, and I have not crossed a graduation stage since. I know a glowing plastic toy said boy when I laughed at the idea, and there is now a 2nd grader in the next room humming to himself while he builds a fort out of couch cushions. And I know the last piece of that board I couldn't quite make myself discard is still in my silverware drawer, wrapped in a receipt thin enough that the shape shows through if the kitchen light hits it right. If I am honest, that is why I never buy full matching cutlery sets. The drawer stays crowded on purpose. Butter knives, take-out chopsticks, baby spoons I forgot to donate, plastic forks from the fair. I like the clutter. It means the planchette has to stay buried under ordinary life to look like what it probably always was, a cheap piece of plastic. And if it isn't, I would rather keep forcing it to live among can openers and soy sauce packets than give it a clean place of its own.